Okay, I am happy to introduce Tzu Chi Yen from the University of Colorado at Boulder. He's going to be talking about constructing simplicial complexes with some degree size sequences.
Okay, thanks, Kyle, and thanks the organizers for assemble a great conference for students in combinatorics. My name is Tzu Chi Yen. I'm from Colorado Boulder. I am a computer scientist by training and fourth year, and I think a lot about complex systems and statistical models, algorithms, and work closely with data. And today's talk is about an interesting algorithm that I am curious how mathematicians or computer scientists would think or explain. Yeah, it's an algorithm about where the input is two integer sequences, where we call the degree sequence and the size sequence. And we are going to use the two sequences to assemble to construct a simplicial complex. And okay, first of all, I want to thank my advisors and also the authors of the paper, especially Jean-Gab and Aleche. It is by their conversations with them that I know this is an open problem. In the space of randomizing simplicial complexes, which is the meat of the paper, I mean their paper. But their paper is about an algorithm that can randomize a simplicial complex such that for the ensemble, for each instance in the ensemble, they all share the same degree and size sequences. But that Monte Carlo algorithm requires an initialization, which in their paper comes from the data. But then the work I'm going to introduce comes from arbitrary sequences. So first of all, there's some definitions. Say we have an input data that's like papers and authors represented on the left here. And then we can think of different ways to model them. So that'll be how we represent the data. And then we think of the data as having the nodes as fixed. And then we can start to ask questions such as, has this pair of authors written together? That means we are picking two nodes as an edge. And then we will have a data that looks like this. And then it's a representation of a network or graph. Or we can think like explicitly whether any number of authors have written a paper together. That'll be n nodes as hyper edges. And then we will have data like this, and a visualization of the data. Whereas for simplicial complexes, that's the focus of this paper, we can ask a quite similar question like, has this set of authors worked together? But the thing is, picking n nodes as a simplex, like an hyper edge, has a fine print by the definition of simplicial complexes. That is, it has to include all the smaller number of subsets. For example, if we choose 1, 2, 3 as a simplex, then that means 1, 2, 2, 3, etc. should also be included in a set. So for the data here, we have this that looks a bit unwieldy as the representation. But then by convention, because of this, say, inclusive rule, we will use the maximum simplices called facets to represent a simplicial complex. That is to say, if we choose this as a maximum simplex, then we automatically remove these ones. And this, remove this, and this. So we got a visualization as this. And then there are other lingos such as degree sequence and size sequence, the main target of this work. It's say the green digits are the degree sequences, and it's the edges that's incidental to a node. For example, in a simplicial complex here, this node has degree 2, not degree 3 as in networks, because it's incidental to two simplices, one this one and the other this one. And also size sequences. So for simplicial complex, the size sequence are simply the number of nodes in the simplex. So the goal of the algorithm is clear. It is for given two integer sequences, the degree sequence, size sequence, whether we can construct a simplicial complex out of it. And then we may use the randomized algorithm that I mentioned earlier to find an ensemble. So why do we care about degree and size sequences? It is because local structures may be related to some global functions. For example, in the space of networks, we have the configuration model, which are, like I mentioned, no models where each of them has the same fixed, some kind of descriptors. An example is, say, bun sparrows. In an experiment, researchers are interested in whether the color of the bird is related to their mating behavior. So they attach sensors and record dynamic network out of it. And then from the network, they are looking at the color-color correlation of the data. So we can then randomize the data using the configuration model and then see whether the data that comes from measurement is different or not statistically. So that's one reason we want to focus on local structure. And the other is that being able to generate a network is related to a number of things, such as structural things and dynamical things. Okay, and then my work is related to these different representations in this way. So given data, it is relatively easy to compute its local quantities like degrees and sizes. But then the inverse problem is usually harder in the sense of initialization and harder in the sense of randomization. And for graphs, these are problems that people have attacked in the past few decades. And recently there's work on simplicial complexes as well as hypergraphs. And I feel like my work feels in this space that I plot in as a green arrow here. But then the algorithm that I proposed is unlike the Erdős, Galai, and Havel-Hakimi algorithm because these algorithms are can be done in polynomial time. But then the problem of, and they are also called the graphicality testing problem. But for the simpliciality testing problem, it's actually related to a NP complete problem. So, which is a bummer because it's in a related problem about 3 hypergraphs. But that also means we cannot solve simpliciality testing in a general way. So literally when I do the research, I literally just use Excel to plot to try different kinds of algorithms. So so this is the incidence matrix that we are going to fill out, and these are the inputs. So the question is if we can fill ones or zeros in the incidence matrix such that say the column sums to this input and the row sums to this. And the third condition, which is making this problem hard, is that any 2 rows cannot be a subset of each other. So that's the inclusion constraint, like the no inclusion constraint that I mentioned earlier. So yeah, for k-uniform instances, it's quite hard in the way that if we have a larger instance, then it's like we just cannot hit the set when we try to propose stuff. But then I also find instances that are seems to be easy. for example, if we have a input that's all ones, like 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, and then it's easy to fill ones here because we can do just 1, 1, 1, and then skip a column, 1, 1, 1, and then 1, 1, 1 follows. So turns out that actually most of the input sequences can be solved in polytime using a simple algorithm I'm going to mention in the next slide. So I actually now have an algorithm in the supplementary material. I'm not going into detail of it, but then the general idea is as follows. So it's a recursive algorithm. We have a while loop, explore all possible possibilities. But then we try to fill up the ones here, like row by row, whereas the input is also sorted in a way from larger to smaller. And then every time we are going to do like a proposal, we want to find a proposal facet for a specific row. That's like this one, whether we choose put zeros or ones. We follow the heuristic policy such that like if the nodes have larger degrees, we prioritize them. So that's the key heuristic policy in the algorithm. And then we are going to reject the proposal facet by some simple rules, such that, for example, if we have a proposal such that the sums simply goes like beyond the input, then we reject that. And there are other rules. And then there's some like cutoffs in it, such that we can like say give up if we have explored too much of the tree. And turns out this is an very effective algorithm. This slide I'm going to show some results on some randomized instances. For example, we can take all partitions of 13. That will be 101 different partitions. So 101 times 101. So for each of the like inputs, we try to test our algorithm. And what we plot is the time that we count, the time that we get backtracked, or the time we get rejected for the proposal facet. And you can see it's mostly just white and gray, because I want to show that actually most of the inputs, a solution can be found when there are there's no rejections. You like zoom in, you can see some instances that are harder, but then in general it looks like quite easy. And the arrows here are for the more uniform partitions. So the more uniform partitions seems to be harder somehow. And then we also look at the hard instances. So the uniform, the k-uniform instances, and then look at the running time distribution. And then remember, these are the NP-complete instances that I mentioned. And we found that so the ticks I plotted here has no easy instances. It's all hard instances, and actually more than 80% of the instances falls into the easy part. So there's no rejections during the algorithm. And then another part, we try to scale things up. So we take we try to take larger and larger inputs, and then the number of partitions that sums to some integer that's larger and larger will be getting much larger and much larger. So I only take n to the 6 out of it, and try to see how much of them is in polytime, how much of them is in simplicial, and the number of simplicial instances out of the number of polytime instances out of all those that are simplicial. And again, we find that most inputs have have no rejections during the algorithm. Okay, any questions up to this point?
I have a question. So what is the difference between the simplicial and the non-simplicial bars? I'm not sure I understand the difference between the gray and the orange here.
So the simplicial ones are those that we find an instance. Non-simplicial ones that are the instances that are either we either give up or we either have simple ways to reject them. So because of the cutoff, there's a can't see my cursor here. Because of the cutoff, we see a tick here because those are the ones that we give up.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving forward. Wait, sorry.
So just as a follow-up to that, so when you say give up, you're not saying that it's necessarily not simplicial, it's just your things giving up at that point. Okay.
Yep. Yep. Okay, so there are other minor things such as whether the heuristic that will lead to some instances with specific topology. And so like other work, we compute the Beatty number of the instances. So the general intuition for Beatty numbers are that, say we look at Beatty 0 and Beatty 1. The Beatty 0 is the number of kinetic components, like this stuff has Beatty 0.2, and this one has Beatty 0.1. It's one kinetic component, but it has one loop. So Beatty 1 is 1. So loops and kinetic components for Beatties. And then the general thing I learned is that by matching larger facets with higher degree nodes, a kind of heuristic, we find the instance tend to be like fragmented and has many cycles. So this is one instance from some data, and then we find, so this is the solution we find. And then we compute the beta 0 and beta 1 in a space compared with the configuration model. And it's quite, quite exotic in a space of stuff. So I'm curious whether there's novel mechanism for generating structures with interesting topologies. I mean, one of the mechanisms I propose here is this matching facets, larger facets with larger degree nodes. And other things include, say, since I can now do things on arbitrary input sequences, so I can look at, say, Poisson degrees and Poisson sizes and try to like, tune the knobs and see how the structures change. And what I learned is, okay, I look at the holes, number of holes. And what I learned is that, say, for network, what would happen, this is a question for the audience, what would happen for a network if we have fixed the size distribution? So sizes are all twos because they are the edges. But then we increase the degrees. So we expect the structure to be denser and denser. So it's like this way of seeing the graph. And then for simplicial complexes, it's the other way of seeing graphs because they have larger facet sizes. So for networks, facet sizes are all 2. Turns out for networks, we expect denser networks to have more loops, but for simplicial complexes, denser simplicial complexes will have fewer loops because of the no inclusion constraint. And then the other interesting thing I find is by looking at the other dimension, and turns out there's some kind of matching where we can generate the most number of holes when the facet size changes. Okay, so concluding slide. Yeah, we can, so using the algorithm, we can efficiently sample simplicial ensembles from arbitrary input sequences. And because there are easy instances and hard instances, it illustrates something called the fine-grained complexity which I find interesting because they are all NP complete in general, but some of them are easy. And then I have written up a Python package where people can use for initiating a structure. Finally, I have some questions for dear fellow mathematicians. One, why does the algorithm work so well when it works? And a related info is the question of testing graph isomorphism because it's in polytime when the input data is a random graph. But it will be very hard when the input data is a regular graph. So some high level explanation can be that when the degrees are heterogeneous, so those nodes that have high degrees can help break the symmetry, so make the problem easier. But I'm not sure whether there's an analogy in the algorithm I propose here. And other things include, say, approximate counting of the instances, and also whether there's a Erdős-Galai like related expression for those are simplicial. Yeah, that's the conclusion of my talk. Thanks.
Look at the round of applause. Great talk. Does anyone have any questions for the speaker?
I think I'm going to end up having more things I want to talk about that can fit in this time. So if we can find some other space in the conference to talk, that would be good.
Yeah, I also have a lot of questions that I wrote down as well.
That'll be great. Yeah.
I guess my first question though is, so you know how often your algorithm fails. Do you have any class of data where for this class of data, I know exactly all degree sequences and size sequences that can show up. And so how often does my algorithm fail because no simplicial complex exists? And how often does it fail because it does exist, but it's just too hard to find? Do you have any sense of that?
The only related thing that the only related intuition I have is a plot of this. It's more of the one below. It's a statistical, just a statistical understanding. But then from a specific instance, it seems that I'm not sure if there's a dimension that we can look at the instances such that, say, all easy instances are like aggregated in somehow, and there's some clear boundaries of easy and hard instances.
Okay,
and,
sure.
Yeah, I don't have good intuition for this. Also, I've tried it on empirical data, say given empirical data, and I pretend I don't see the data and just the sequences. And then some of them are easy, some of them are hard, and I have no clue why some of them are hard. But then statistically, most of them are easy.
Sure. I don't want to, I've got a couple other things, but I don't want to monopolize the time.
I'll ask a question then. So the simplicial complexes that you got out of this, it seemed like they had very large number of components, right? I guess I had like two sort of related questions to that. First of all, is this like just a product of the algorithm that has a predisposal to finding ones with high number of components? or is it just something where, given a degree sequence, it's any of these simplicial complexes that are determined by this degree sequence is going to have a large number of components?
Can you say your first question again?
Sorry, I asked like two questions there. The first question, so does your algorithm have like can you see why it's giving you a very large Betty number, like a very large number of components? I guess from the algorithm, is there something in the algorithm that says like, oh, this is clearly why I'm giving like a large beta 0?
Yes, because I greedily try to pair larger facets with those with larger degrees.
Okay.
So at the end, there will be some like tails.
I see.
Dots.
Okay, yeah. So okay, yeah. So you're basically just taking all the complicated stuff, putting it together, and everything else you're just sort of not tossing off to the side, but it's like, okay, I see. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. That makes sense. I guess. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense given how you explain the algorithm. And then so like my second question was like, is this problem more tractable if you say, given a prescribed degree and size sequence, is there a connected simplicial complex, like as in with beta 0 equal to 1?
Could be. Yeah. One of the things in the algorithm is that at very early stage, we try to pair the ones in the size sequence with the ones in the degree sequence. So it's a kind of factorization.
I see. Okay, does anyone else have, thank you. Does anyone else have any more questions for the speaker?
Can I ask one?
Yeah.
Okay, so your problem says, given a degree sequence and size sequence, does there exist a simplicial complex with this data? I suppose there's a related problem of if one does exist, how many exist? Do you have any thoughts on that problem? Do you think your algorithm could be adapted to study that?
I don't have any thoughts about the problem. The ones I know is more like experimental because there is an existing sampler for sampling the ensemble. So I may try given some input and let it generate the ensemble and simply look at the relative sizes. But then I am very curious about other like in the field of combinatorics, like say asymptotic enumeration methods to do those kind of work. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks.
I guess I've got one final, hopefully short question. Are you familiar with the term clutters as a combinatorial object?
No.
Okay, so clutter is kind of like halfway. It's there are a couple different ways of thinking about a clutter, but they're hypergraphs where no edges are contained in other edges. And so you can also think of clutters as facet lists for simplicial complexes. And so I think your degree and size sequences only care about the facet list of a simplicial complex. And so it's a useful combinatorial term just to know that there may be other related literature instead of simplicial complex and facets. Because yeah, I think you could make this into an equivalent clutter problem, and who knows what people have said about it.
Thanks for the suggestion. I will certainly look up.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I would like to clutter the while I'd like to clutter the time for more questions for the speaker, we have to move on to the next talk. So I'll thank Tzu Chi Yen again.